Good morning, everybody. Good morning. First of all, my apologies for not being a woman. I wish we had more women on this panel. Diversity is a very important thing. So Jen's going to actually hold the fort on that subject. My name is Andrew Rasiej. I'm the founder of Civic Hall, which is a collaborative work and event space in the Flatiron District. I'm also chairman of the New York Tech Alliance, which is a 60,000 member organization that's focused on supporting the New York tech community. In 1997, I founded an organization called Mouse, which started wiring public schools to the internet back then, and now runs training programs, terrific training programs, not only in New York, but around the country. And lastly, just as a quick anecdote, as an advance to this panel, I ran for public advocate in 2005 on a platform to make New York City the most wired city in the world. And when I went to the New York Times editorial board for my endorsement interview, the New York Times asked me, "What's Wi-Fi?" Just to give you an idea of how, that was 2005. So that was almost 11 years ago. We've come a long way since then, but we still have a long way to go. I'm going to try to make this panel as interactive as possible. So we're going to do about a 30-minute discussion amongst ourselves here on the panel, but I'm going to open it up to the audience and try to make it as interactive as we can. I'm going to ask each of our... Oh, here is Alphonso. Great. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to quickly, in 1 minute, introduce themselves and to explain why they think broadband matters for them. And then we'll dig into what each of them is doing, and we'll try to move it to the audience as quickly as possible. I've got a couple of provocative questions that touch on some of the things we heard in the first session this morning. So without further ado, Bruce, why don't you start?
Good
1
morning.
minute, please.
My name is Bruce Lincoln. I'm the co-founder of SiliconHarlem. Broadband is important because, similar to 100 years ago, it is like a utility. So in the same way we need electrification, it's the electrification of the 21st century.
I get his extra 30 seconds. Hi, everybody. My name is Sree, and I'm the new Chief Digital Officer of New York City. I'm on day 5, and so it's a real pleasure to be here to learn. I'm here to listen on this panel, and I committed to not being the Chief Digital Officer of Lower Manhattan, and my goal is to spend as much time as I can here with Clayton, Bruce, and all of you, and the mayor is absolutely committed, not just to broadband, as you'll hear from my colleague, but also he announced my job with my job description. He tweeted it. He said, "Sree, we're going to make New York the most tech-friendly, the most transparent, and the most digitally equitable city in the world." And that's very clear, very simple, and very scary, because now, a year from now, some of you will say, "Have you done this yet?" So we're going to work on that, but we won't be able to do it without your help. So thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to working with all of you.
Hi, I'm Andrew Afflerbach. I'm Director of Engineering at CTC. Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me. I wanted to, I guess, just say a little bit about my perspective on broadband. To me, it is really now just become the entry path to not only knowing where you need to go or what you need to do, but just life in general. Right now, my firm, which is a public interest engineering and planning firm, is doing work in Atlanta and in Seattle that's entirely focused on the whole range of digital divide, wireless and smart city applications, with a focus on getting not only access but maintaining privacy and maintaining the dignity really in what kind of services and activities are taken care of. And our involvement in New York dates back to the 90s, where in the cable TV franchise agreements with Time Warner, Cablevision, and MFN, iNet fiber capacity was negotiated from those companies, which became the backbone for not only city services but also the distance learning components and a highly survivable, powerful network. And so the important thing is to look at today, what are the mechanisms to getting to where, the equivalent of the 1990s, where the cable franchise agreements, and looking at where we are right now. There are public-private partnerships and a lot of other possibilities are there, but the public has to be protected as those are structured.
Hi, I'm Jen Hensley. Hi, is it? Hi, I'm Jen Hensley. I'm general manager of LinkNYC, and we are bringing a free gigabit Wi-Fi service to the streets of New York, replacing the payphone infrastructure. And broadband matters to us because cellular data is very expensive, and New Yorkers spend a lot of time on the streets, moving in and around the city. We have 56 million visitors in the city every year, and giving them access to broadband to be able to offload their cellular data and get access to information where they are on a daily basis is absolutely critical to improving the quality of life here and bridging the digital divide.
Hi, my name is Al Jenkins. I'm Deputy Commissioner of Telecommunications Planning for DoITT, and I'm responsible for all the franchises in the city, all of the cable providers, all of the fiber providers, all of the park Wi-Fi, and premier franchisees like Intersection and the LinkNYC deployment, as well as Transit Wireless and many others in the city. We're responsible also for a unit named the Policy and Strategy Unit. What we do is broker, if you will, master services agreements with incumbent providers to provide voice and data and managed and wireless services to city agencies. We're also responsible for telecommunications planning and resiliency, which we oversee and prepare standards and guidelines for those third-party providers for the resiliency of their networks at mission-critical locations around the city of New York. We're looking to extend that to city agencies as well in terms of hardening their resiliency for telecommunication services. And we're also responsible for a broadband planning unit. That planning unit basically is a core organization that's responsible for the mayor's initiative of proliferating broadband to everyone everywhere by 2025. You could look at DoITT as sort of being the solution architects of the chief executive's initiative, subject to organization, engineering, planning, cost modeling, budgeting, and then taking that and taking policy and legal services back to the chief executive subject to announcements. So broadband matters to us because we're preparing solutions for that and evolving legacy franchise agreements to next generation services, as well as looking forward to putting together a network of networks so that wireless solutions would be ubiquitous across the city of New York.
So instead of us repeating all the reasons why we think broadband matters, because I think everybody who's actually even at this conference or watching it online actually believes very strongly that broadband matters for a whole bunch of reasons, whether it's economic rights, information rights, human rights. We all believe deeply in it. So we have an amazing panel. I'm going to start asking them to sort of tell us where they see the opportunities, where they see traction on actually bridging this long-standing divide between the haves and the have-nots, either because of cost or because of technical issues or because of policy issues associated with it. And so, Bruce, I know that you've been championing this in Harlem for as long as I've known you, almost 20 years. There's been some announced projects to wire Harlem beyond other struggling neighborhoods in New York, economically struggling neighborhoods in New York. Give us a little update. What's going on here where in this neighborhood, around this neighborhood? Where have you seen progress? Where are the challenges? Where are the opportunities?
Thanks, Andrew. And as you remember from this morning, we announced our ConnectUptown.NYC initiative, and that's basically because a number of factors have converged over the course of what, as Andrew knows and as Gail alluded to, has been 20 years. But we're at the point now where, one, we actually have a level of understanding across all the key partners and stakeholders in Harlem. Our community boards understand its importance. An organization such as the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, which is over 120 years old, understands its importance. And we've been able to as well elevate Harlem as a flagship as it looks at what a potential solution is. So a couple things that have also happened. We've got the Harlem Wireless Network, which is a bulwark against trying to solve this from the wireless standpoint. So we've platformed ourselves on a certain level as far as free Wi-Fi. But what we're looking at now as we work with DoITT and work with Columbia is how we can actually start to end City College and under the umbrella of the One NYC initiatives, from the mayor's office is now deploy a set of incremental solutions that, one, bring the fiber, such as what is powering LinkNYC. We have advances as it has to do with what we can do with wireless, and we're starting to, in working with our community boards, bring on the real estate owners. So what we see are all these things that are starting to happen. A conducive environment as far as policy, an informed polity as far as all the stakeholders, and then advances in technologies, which if we basically ride that curve over the next 2 to 3 years, we can start to make incremental advances in what's possible as we address this issue of digital equity and digital inclusion.
So I don't necessarily want everybody to go just right down the row. If somebody hears something and wants to comment, please. I'm going to actually go to Jen now. So why don't you give us an update on where where the rollout is citywide? And there's been a couple of bumps along the road, which we've read about, but in terms of how the kiosks are being used. But tell us a little bit about where we are and how the progress is.
Absolutely. So we are building a dedicated fiber network through all 5 boroughs. It's gigabit fiber, the fastest available internet that we're bringing to every single Link kiosk. So it's definitely a big project. We put the first Link in the ground and activated it in February of this year, and we've been rolling out quickly ever since. We have more than 400 Links installed today in Manhattan, the Bronx, and Queens, and are currently underway with infrastructure activity in Brooklyn and Staten Island, and hope to bring kiosks up there very shortly. We have over 670,000 subscribers to the LinkNYC network, which I think speaks to the power of the network. With only approximately 400 links in the ground, we're seeing 670,000 people who've signed up for our free internet. So I think that's leaps and bounds above some of the other initiatives that have happened in other cities where you would see, maybe 10,000 people signing up over the course of 6 months or a year. So we're really excited about that. We have more than 30,000 people just signed up in the last week alone. We're seeing about 30,000 tablet uses of our tablets and phone calls made every week. So proving, I think, again, that this infrastructure on the street, the access to the information that the kiosks offer, is really compelling in all of the communities where we've been deployed. We did have instances, as Gail mentioned at the outset of the discussion today, where people were monopolizing links. They were standing in front of them for hours at a time, watching movies on the internet browser and things like that. And so with the support of DoITT and of the mayor's office, we decided to remove the internet browser on the kiosks. You can still access 311, make 911 phone calls, free domestic phone calls anywhere in the U.S., and access to maps. And our development team is hard at work to develop additional services that we're going to be rolling out over the coming weeks and months.
Jen, has there been any data that you could share about how what information is actually being searched or used on those kiosks?
So we don't track anybody's information when you're on our Wi-Fi network. We're not tracking your browser history on your phone. On the kiosks, we know that 30,000 people are making phone calls every week. We have about approximately on the order of 10,000 map searches and about 6,000 or 7,000 311 app access.
General request.
Exactly.
General request. So I am fortunate enough to be on the mayor's broadband task force, and a number of initiatives that the mayor has been focusing on related to the broadband task force have to do with wiring NYCHA housing projects and getting really the most needy New Yorkers online. But I wanted to push the conversation a little bit beyond the idea that broadband is only for us to be able to access information, get on the internet, use it for applying for a job or get information for applying for benefits and other needs for underserved communities. I want to suggest that we're now facing opportunities around the Internet of Things and the way in which broadband can be used to make our city work better, not necessarily a smart city, maybe a less dumb city. And I wanted to actually ask Andrew this question because you have the word energy in your in the title of CTC's work, and I wanted to sort of ask you if you could talk a little bit about how people, either real estate owners, building owners, cities, and others are starting to recognize broadband as a vehicle to create a profit center around saving energy and building new mechanisms for the way cities work, which may provide additional funding to then pay for broadband to reach even more underserved people, not just because it's an imperative, but because it's actually a profit center for saving the public money.
Sure, and I think that's becoming sort of the holy grail that one's looking for in these smart city efforts. What is essentially the payoff and the positive side of the ledger for the investments? So as you mentioned, like some of it has to do with energy and in terms of investment in outdoor infrastructure. Partners have looked into the possibility of funding infrastructure in return for the savings from migration to LED lighting is one possibility. Another, as you mentioned, is potential savings from different sorts of building automation, because of course, if you have technologies that just very carefully sense things like when it's possible to drop a temperature a couple of degrees and ventilation and so forth, still maintaining, you have a lot of possibilities for the savings, and then the companies that invest in that could be paid to a large extent out of those savings. I think all those things are really sort of critical, and then and also in any sort of partnership that involves the city, one has to also consider the things that the city brings to the table. I think LinkNYC is a very great example of how the city has brought forward physical infrastructure, places to connect and so forth as part of what they're doing. In addition to that, cities are well suited for building long-term infrastructure. Since we're talking about a utility, really, we should be thinking about it the same way as the roads, and then the long-term investment, the city being able to borrow, the city being, of course, here for the long term, can create that infrastructure and then create partnerships with people at the higher layers where those folks had to be quicker on their feet and, of course, assume their own risk as well.
Let me add some to that in terms of the city perspective. I mean, one of our more premium assets here in the city is real estate, and to the extent that we can introduce that real estate to telecommunications providers in the way that reduces barriers and streamlines the process of getting telecommunications services to a variety of locations, we're clearly looking to architect those solutions bigger and better than any other city in the U.S. Some of the ways we're doing that is within our existing mobile telecom franchise agreements. I mean, we manage and own city-owned properties, specifically streetlight poles, and introduce those to multiple providers across the city to bring in 3G, 4G, and potentially 5G solutions, as well as managing tons of buildings, whether it's from any agency, NYCHA properties to DOB properties to DCAS properties. And we're looking to also make market value for telecommunications service providers to provide service to those properties and to the residents and to the commercial and industrial businesses by way of making fair market value, incentivizing those providers to come to that real estate, as well as also brokering the in-kind services that we can include in our relationship with those providers to the public at large.
Sree, I know you've only been on the job for, 4 days? But you're a longtime digital native and leader, and your predecessor, Jess Singleton, and the mayor worked on the digital playbook. For those who don't know, the mayor announced an initiative to make sure that every agency was interacting with New Yorkers in a 21st century way and establishing some standards of service and interaction. So let's assume that some of these initiatives where we're bridging the divide, the ones that Bruce mentioned, or the unique technologies that are being deployed by the city through either LinkNYC or by DoITT, that we're reaching more people. What can they do? Are the agencies ready to interact? I heard a story recently that a startup created an app that makes it easier for people to apply for food stamps using their smartphone, and the agency refused to accept the applications because the agency only accepts the applications via fax. I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize how challenging it is to move New York City's bureaucracy into the 21st century. Everybody is expecting it to happen instantly. you're at the front lines now. Why don't you comment a little bit about what you already know and what you'd like to see? And why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how you view your role? I think this is one of your first public events. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Thanks. Thank you. I think that we're all learning about how to operate in the 21st century in 2017, 2016 as not just a city, but also as citizens and residents and folks who engage with the city. I think that it's going to be increasingly important that the city hears what the ideas are, what's already being done by entrepreneurs throughout the city. I think that's a very good opportunity. I like to say the Chief Digital Officer's role is Chief Listening Officer, to go out and hear ideas and then bring them back when they make sense, and then to see the scale of what New York's doing. One of the things that's been so exciting for me in the 4 days is being in meetings where I'm taking notes about things I had no idea the city was doing. So as a resident, it's been wonderful. How do we bring that to all of you who have a stake in the success and future of the city? So in terms of the role that I'm looking at is working with our great colleagues at DoITT and other agencies, is to see how can we continue to make New York a place where every interaction for the public with the city, even if it's not a pleasure, at least is less painful than it is at the moment, and to take the great energy that I find in the meetings that I'm at and help translate that into the way that all of you are interacting with us. So I'm looking at the kind of the digital strategy behind public-facing technology in the city and helping my colleagues, the 70-plus agencies, for example. So whether it's helping to think through what happens with LinkNYC going forward, or working on social media for all these agencies that are doing their own social media. And also another part of my role is working with startups and helping them. There are many people in the city who work with startups, but my job is going to be to see how do we get startups to be born here, stay here, thrive here, because we think there are a lot of opportunities. One way I look at it is and Andrew, I love your story about 2005 and how the Times reacted to Wi-Fi. I think that if you look back at the story of Facebook and when the founders were deciding whether to moving from Cambridge, do they go to New York or Silicon Valley? In 2004, it was obvious that you go to Silicon Valley. But today, we want to make the case that you come here and you see the amazing opportunities where we're all in one city where we're able to interact and connect. And I think that's going to make a big difference in the way that we can help with startups and startups can help us and all of us can work together.
So here's an idea that since we have DoITT here, when we have a wired city in many ways. I mean, you open your phone, walk around any part of New York, and you'll see dozens and dozens of Wi-Fi networks, all of them locked down. And the telco and the cable providers have terms of services that basically prevent you from sharing your Wi-Fi with your neighbors. But imagine, putting aside privacy and security, there are ways to do this, all of those access points open. We'd have a far more wired city. So I'm going to ask directly, is there a way that the city in its negotiations with the telcos and the cable companies, which have developed a duopoly, whether we like it or not, that's what it is, can we force them to change their terms of service in a way where people can authenticate themselves on a network centrally, protect their data on their machine, but leave their routers open and accessible to more people so that when they're not using it, other people can use it?
So it's a good question and certainly a good dilemma for many city government agencies. Here in New York City, we have the dynamics of having multiple incumbent Wi-Fi operators in the city, many of them that have been operating here for years. And now we have new franchisees like Intersection as well as Transit Wireless who are building premium Wi-Fi services in the city. To the extent that we would like to sort of build an open network, sort of a federation, if you will, of all of those existing incumbent providers and sort of connect them to have a one service footprint across the city, this is what the city is looking to work on. The things that we have to do in order to make that happen are a variety of things, notwithstanding one of them being very technical, but there's certainly legal implications, security implications, privacy concerns, financial concerns, as well as what is the interest of the city at the end of the day with respect to this federation. One of the interests of the city is clearly to manage and maintain broadband usage data in the city. In terms of having those relationships with those incumbents and being able to have access to that data and then draw it to one central location and do it quartermastering that certainly can give the city a lot more strategic implications in terms of governing itself going forward, civic engagement, using that for a variety of different sectors in the city, whether it's healthcare, public safety, whether it's environmental, et cetera, in terms of using that data. So we're constantly working with every incumbent in the city to work on what we call an interoperability steering committee so that we can interoperate between each other and New Yorkers can go out and hopefully have a seamless and ubiquitous service across the city, having to authenticate only once, and maybe not even ever, as soon as you walk out of the door. Now you're completely connected, notwithstanding what network that you may be roaming into.
So I'm going to open up for questions, so get them ready. I just got one more I want to ask. So we talked a little bit earlier about schools and the need to wire them. I just want to quickly point out, if you were to count up how many hours schools are actually open during the course of the year and do that as a percentage of time, schools are only open 15% of all the time in the year. And kids are actually in class only half of that time, so about 8% of all the time in the year. So if we give them internet access, which of course schools need, they're only going to be able to access the internet about 1% of all of their lives. I want to ask anybody here, who would be successful in their lives and in their businesses if you only had access to the internet 1% of your life? I don't see a single hand raised. You know, the key here is not just wiring schools or libraries for that matter, but actually wiring people and really bridging the divide and making it imperative. If there was a comet that was headed for New York, and there was by some cosmic rule, it was discovered that if every New Yorker was wired to the internet, the comet would veer off. The public officials and private sector would work really, really hard, really, really fast to get every single New York City resident wired. When Facebook needed to buy WhatsApp, they figured out in 5 days how to spend $22 billion really fast when it's an imperative. When diversity needs to become an imperative, it's really hard because there are a lot of complicated reasons why we don't have as diverse a city or a leadership. So I'm going to ask each of our members to just say 2 words, 3 words of what they think would move the needle faster and better, and then we'll open up to the questions. So but really short, Bruce. 3 words, 4 words. That's it. What's going to change it?
I think you start middle school getting the students the modern day skills.
Words, Bruce. Go ahead, Sree.
I think you're demanding and participating as much as you can in these conversations.
I think creativity and things like ordinances that would require in new buildings and other places incentives or requirements for having conduit and other infrastructure into buildings in important places as they're built while they're being built.
Underlying financial model.
And I would say the city investing in its own infrastructure.
There we go. Okay, questions. Right here.
Okay, I'll bring the mic around. We have one right back here.
And try to keep the question short, and we'll just keep it moving. Anybody who wants to answer the question.
I think we should have a one-day transit strike. Everybody walk where they need to go. It's not hard to get around to say we want broadband, ubiquitous broadband, and make some kind of real protest statement rather than wait for these committees, because that sounds so bureaucratic, Mr. Jenkins. The process sounds too bureaucratic for me. So thank you.
And the millennials are going protest.
We're gonna get to this question
we could
here,
just like send out a tweet and get that done, right? By the way, how many students do we have here? Students, raise your hand. See there, Andrew? We got some young people here. Who has the next question? We're going to come here and I'll get to the back.
Hi, I'm Alex Sass. I live and work in Harlem, and it's a pleasure to be here. When I first arrived to New York in 2003, there was this wireless initiative called NYC Wireless. Maybe some of you remember that?
Yeah.
And then we see LinkNYC, and I'm thinking, did you guys learn anything from these precedents? Meaning here and around the world. What are you learning about open wireless access, and what have you applied?
I mean, what we learned is that in order to have a network that people really want to use and that's going to be state of the art for the life of our 12-year franchise with the City of New York and to uphold our commitment to the public service that we're offering, we really need to bring the fastest available internet, the best speeds, the best technology onto the streets. And so we've made significant investments in both the underground infrastructure and the access points that we're deploying. And we have an agreement with DoITT to upgrade those over time as new technology becomes available. So I think, it's not a one and done thing, right? Like you don't put it in and walk away from it. It's a network that you have to keep investing in, that you have to maintain at a level and at a capacity that can provide users the service that they want and need. And so I think that's probably the biggest lesson that we've learned from other deployments elsewhere.
Yeah. My question or comment is, isn't this really about political power? I mean, we have an order of magnitude deficit in infrastructure in New York City, not just broadband, but everything. The subways are falling apart, the roads are terrible, and yet property prices in the city have appreciated 300 to 1,000% in just 15 years. There's tons of money in the city, and what I'd like to know is where is the political organization and pressure coming from to change this and to tap into these sources of money? Who is advocating? What are they doing, and how can people here join their efforts or start their own? I mean, I think if we stay limited in kind of technocratic solutions, we're just going to be operating in the narrow band of what's possible given the unwillingness to spend any more money than what we're spending, notwithstanding the fact that we've got billions, maybe trillions in this city floating around, maybe in the wrong hands.
I'll just take that for everybody. I mean, it's such an important point, and I don't think there's really a clear answer, but I guess the biggest is to create understanding by the power brokers who care very much about economic development to understand how important infrastructure really is. I think they're starting to see that happen, not just in broadband, but transportation. I think this is a city that was very successful in the 20th century, and I think wants to remain successful in the 21st. I think you're going to see a lot more public-private partnerships towards rebuilding our city as a 21st century success story. I think it's just going to take some time. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's about political power. But a lot more voices are being heard these days than previously.
This is a great conference. We got the smartest people in the world right here, Andrew. So
Let them ask questions.
That's what I'm talking about. Oh, my goodness. The great Dan Kilp.
Thanks, Clayton. It's really exciting to see this focus on the network, which I think is a really key enabler here. Now, Sree mentioned creating an environment where startups can thrive and will stay around, and I think universities can play an important role there. So I'm with Columbia University, and we've got some fantastic universities in the area here. If you could get the research and development at these universities happening in the community and the environment, I think that's a situation where then you can create startups from the innovation that's coming out of that. You can engage the community, create jobs for the community, and really create a vibrant situation. I know that Al's been very supportive of these types of initiatives. Can you give your perspective on the role of universities that you see for broadband in the city?
Yeah, thank you. I met yesterday with the folks at the Tech Talent Pipeline, which I hope some of you know about this initiative, which is connecting the 15 universities and the employers in the city. And it turns out, this is a stat that I just learned, there are 300,000 people who work in technology companies and in technology roles at non-technology companies in the city. And that tells you that there is an opportunity to make those connections much stronger. And I think in some of the cases, the employers are saying that the universities aren't necessarily teaching things that they can use the skills that they can use day one in their roles. So how do we make sure that the curricula and what's being taught at all the universities and colleges and community colleges and all of that makes sense for the employers, and then focus it on opportunities like infrastructure, as well as other topics that people are interested in. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question. Thank you for all being here. Why is New York City better than San Francisco for a startup? And I'm looking for serious responses. I'm just not, in a serious way. Why would you consider New York City to be a better place to start a business in San Francisco?
So, Silicon Valley is not the tech industry. It's a place. New York City is the most diverse city in the world with the highest concentration of human talent of any city in the world. And it's no longer about being a tech company, it's about being a 21st century professional. In New York City, it's not just about tech companies, it's every single industry, every single company based in New York, which includes mostly every company around the world, has some office in New York, is trying to convert itself into a digital enterprise of some sort. So even though there's great innovation happening in Silicon Valley and there's great technology, the future is not based on the technology, it's based on the human capital. And New York has the highest quality human capital of any city in the world, and that's the answer.
Oh, whoa. In our hood, Andrew, we would just drop the mic right there.
Good morning. Thank you to all of you for being here. Really appreciate this conference. This question I have is kind of two-part, and maybe I'm a little naive in asking, but it seems to always boil down to a profit motive. Who's making money at the end of the day when it comes to broadband? And this duopoly you were talking about, if I go online, I want to get online. I have two or three choices, really, at the end of the day. Is there some way that we can talk to these companies and do what we do for the real estate, where you say, okay, you can build this development, but you have to put aside a certain amount of broadband for free or for cheap to these communities right now? That's the first question. The second is there any process in the city? I know we're not really allowed to make referendums, but is there any way to have a kind of referendum that the people can vote on this and sort of push the needle forward?
What you see here today is one of those responses to the need to not simply, recognize that it's a duopoly, but also work with that, but also create new solutions. And we know that that has to do with this idea of a public-private partnership. So that's why we've got a number of different people here. So there are initiatives being pushed from DoITT, which is unprecedented in the city, but also we've got someone here like Kevin Sheehan who's bringing together a number of different companies that are very focused on, through real estate, looking at how we are able to, get this to everyone in the community. So we're also trying to drive this in that way. But yeah, there's the profit motive, and that also colors the way in which the network's been built, but we're trying to build the network very differently. We call it engineering for equity. So the idea is, from this point forward, we're going to think about how we include everyone in the fabric of the city, knowing, as Dan said, that the network and the technology is an enabling technology. I think your second question, someone from the city might want to answer as far as a referendum.
No referendums. However, we do have built into our even legacy franchise agreements today from all franchisees that the city actually can acquire additional broadband use. Sometimes it's fiber strands that we can utilize for city use currently and in the future. So we do have plans to actually utilize existing and surplus infrastructure in the ground for next generation broadband services, whether we're going to deploy them today or by a mayor's initiative tomorrow. We're clearly gaining surplus infrastructure from every single franchise agreement that we're brokering today.
All right, we're only going to take one more question, unfortunately, but you'll get a chance to speak with the panelists.
Hi, this is a holdover from the last session, but with the Brain Trust here, I think I can get a good answer. I think it was Mr. Horrigan from the Pew Center, Research Center, mentioned that when broadband's available, the two issues then become readiness to use it and trustworthiness. Okay, we didn't really talk about the trustworthiness, and I'm just looking for a short answer. But is there a substantive conversation going on in terms of the trustworthy issue, you know, in the industry, number one, and if it is, where would you go to it? So it's either yes or no, and then if someone has an idea where that's taking place. If it's no, I think it's something that should be started, so.
I think, you know, what we've anecdotally, you know, we have stories of kids teaching their grandparents how to use the internet. We have better and better access points for adults to realize why they should be online. Unfortunately, when you say trust, I think that they're not necessarily aware of the privacy and security concerns that are, you know, when they're going online, either social media or otherwise. That's a huge education process that has to happen. It's not just the responsibility of the companies providing broadband; it's actually a responsibility of society as a whole, I think, to try to address that. Anyway, I'd like to thank our panel, but just before we do, I just want to point out that we have a very important asset in our midst that we should all recognize, which is that libraries are the most underutilized civic infrastructure that we have today. And they are not just access points, but they're actually distributing Wi-Fi now through hotspots. There was a program that was run by Luke Schwarhart, who's just sitting here in the audience, that basically provided underserved New Yorkers with public school kids with hotspots so they could take it home and actually show their parents how to get online and use it to do their homework and not just hang out outside of McDonald's trying to pick up a Wi-Fi signal. And so that we should realize that this is not just a government issue, this is not just a library issue, it's not just a school issue, it's an everybody issue. And with that, I think this panel was trying to bring to you the fact that there are a lot of really, really smart people and a lot of different initiatives trying to solve this problem. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrew. And thanks, Andrew. And I just wanted to say that my email address is right on my Twitter profile. It's @Sree, and I'm the first Sree in Google. So I'd love for you to reach out and tell us how we can help. I'll be holding kind of office hours in different parts of the city, including SiliconHarlem, I hope, working with these folks. So please be in touch. Thanks very much.
So let me quickly say, yeah, give him a big hand. Give him a big hand. What we're trying to do with SiliconHarlem is bring to this community the experts, the greatest minds, and the people that are really making decisions on all of our behalf. And here on this panel are those minds, and a lot of you, in fact, in this audience. We are going to just some housekeeping, if you will. There's 3 breakouts right now getting ready to happen. One of them is in Theater A, which is Disrupt Government. So all you out there that were like, when are we going to protest and all that stuff? That's in Theater A. In Theater B, which is where you are right now, we are having what's called limitless learning. So those of you who are in education, that'll be an interesting panel. And then in the third theater, Theater C, we have what's called democratized creativity. And the great Dawn Barber just walked in here running across the stage. She's going to moderate that. We've got Michael Peterson from CSNYC moderating the Limitless Learning. And we have John Hart from Opportunity Lives moderating Disrupt Government. You've heard a couple of announcements already today on behalf of SiliconHarlem. There's another 2 that I want to mention right now. One is in behalf of Rise, we are putting a resilient network in East Harlem. SiliconHarlem is putting a resilient network in East Harlem which will survive a disaster. So as you know, in some of the hurricanes we've experienced, it knocks out the internet, it knocks out your utilities. This network will survive that. So we're very excited about that relationship. And I don't know if Nye Whitaker is here, but she's heading that up for us. And the other initiative I want to mention, Lou, come on up here with me for a second. But Lou Zaccarilla, who runs Intelligent Communities, tell them about our quick partnership.
Sure. Thanks, Clay. Congratulations to the panel, by the way. Sree, you don't know what you're in for, but we're here to help you. I'm one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum, and essentially what we've been doing for 20 years is trying to understand the relationship between broadband and economic growth at the community level globally. So we do what SiliconHarlem does, except we're doing it on a global platform. We're based here And in June of next year, we're bringing our conference off the road, where it's been for the last couple years. And we're going to have it here in New York on the 6th through the 8th. SiliconHarlem is a partner of ours, and so we'll be having one day of the dialogue at SiliconHarlem. And what you'll basically hear is a lot of this discussion, but you'll also hear it from people in places like Taiwan, where the president of the country declared that the entire nation would become an intelligent community many years ago. And this year we named 21 intelligent communities of the world. They had 5 of them. They'll be here to share their experiences. And so our belief is that you go to school on other people, you go to school on the best to become the best. You go from the edge to the leading edge, and our work has always been to enable that dialogue any place in the world, and especially at our home, because there's no place like home, right? Right. So we're home, and we're going to bring the conference home. You're all welcome, and we're just delighted that Clay and Bruce, who we've known for 20 years, he's one of the founding fathers of the movement, are involved with us. And 20 years ago, yeah, give him a hand. So 20 years ago, people didn't know what broadband was, and we keep telling people we're giving the same speech we gave 20 years ago. We just get paid a lot more now, and they buy our books. So we're going to keep the dialogue going, and thanks to you guys for allowing us to do that. So you're welcome.
Thanks, Lou. And, 20 years ago, Bruce had gray hair then. So this is my man. So anyway, please go and communicate in these various panels now. This is really sort of as we get more granular on each subject. Theater A, disrupt government. Theater B, limitless learning. Theater C, democratize creativity. We're getting started right away.